Hello and welcome to Cooking with Miss Michelle. Today I'm going to show you how to make strawberry jam. So for this recipe you'll need about 12 cups of strawberries. You could also use other types of berries like raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, or you could do a mixed berry jam if you have different berries or can't decide which berries you would like to use. You're going to need about 7 cups of sugar and either 6 tablespoons of classic fruit pectin, or you can buy just a box and that would be the exact amount that you need. I'd like to get the jars because I make a lot of jam, so I have it around in case I need it. And then I like to put mine in these canning jars so I can seal it and it will last on the shelf until I open it. Then I'll have to put it in the refrigerator. But this will make quite a lot of jam, so unless you're going to eat it right away or give it away, it's best to can it and preserve it for later, or else you have to have a jam feast and use it right away. So I'm going to start by washing my berries, and I'll probably do it in 2 sections because I don't want them to get all squished in here and I want to make sure they get rinsed off really well. So I'm just going to put them in the strainer and then rinse them with cold water. And then I'm going to begin the long process of cutting all the tops off my berries. So if you don't want to cut all the tops off, if you choose pretty much any other type of berry, it would be a lot less work, but I think strawberry jam is the best, so it's worth the effort. And when you cut these tops off, I know they have a special tool you can use called a strawberry huller, but you want to make sure to cut them off and just get as little of the berry as you can, so you save most of your berry to go into your jam. You don't want to cut too much off because then you're going to lose a lot of your berries. And then if you have some animals you can feed the tops to, I know the chickens at school would love them, the goats love them. If you have any other chickens in your life, they would be very happy to get your scraps of the tops. So I'm just gonna cut the tops off my berries, and then I can cut these a little bit. And of course I don't need this sharp of a knife. If I want to use a safer knife, the strawberries are nice and soft so they cut very easily. And I don't need to cut them too small, but I want to cut them into slightly smaller pieces, and then when I measure them, I'll get a more accurate idea of how many cups I actually have. So I'm just going to work on cutting the tops off and chopping up all my berries. Okay, so I've chopped up all my strawberries. While I was doing that, I started my large canning pot to heat up and boil because it'll take quite a while since there's so much water in there. So hopefully it'll be ready by the time I'm done cooking my jam. So I want about 12 cups. I'm just gonna start measuring these into my large pot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and when I have about half of my berries in there, I'm going to start crushing them up with a potato masher. It's a little easier if you don't fill the entire thing, so I'll just start with some and then I'll add a little bit more and crush them up. And making jam is a nice family activity because taking the tops off all the strawberries is quite a lot of work. It's also fun if you go pick the berries yourself. So you could either go to like a You Pick strawberry place, or if you pick blackberries, that's always really fun and you can find them for free on the side of the road. One thing, if you do use blackberries, sometimes they can be a little bit too seedy. So what I like to do is juice half of my blackberries and then just use the other half whole and mash them up. That way it takes out a little bit of the seeds, so it's a little bit better. It's not as crunchy when you eat it. So once these start getting kind of mashed up and juicy, I'm just gonna add a couple more cups. And I should have about the perfect amount here. If you have a little bit more or a little bit less, it's fine. If you had only like, say, 3/4 of the amount, so if you had like 9 cups of strawberries, you could just use like 3/4 the amount of sugar and 3/4 the amount of pectin. Or, you know, if you want to make a double recipe, just double everything. So as long as you have your ratios the same, it'll work just fine. And I know there's different recipes you can use. There are some low sugar jam recipes. If you don't want to use quite as much sugar, you just want to get a low sugar pectin so it'll set up nicely. Some recipes you can actually just use the natural pectin in the fruit, but you generally have to cook it for a very long time. So this pectin is actually made of fruit, but it's much faster to make your jam. So we're only gonna have to boil this for a couple of minutes and then it'll set up. And it looks like I have just a little bit extra. So I used 6 of these containers and it was pretty much perfect. I just have a tiny bit extra. So I'm in good shape here. I'm just gonna crush these up a little more. Okay, so now you can see my berries are starting to get nice and juicy. And I'm going to add my 6 tablespoons of pectin. And I want to make sure they're nice and level. And then before I start cooking this, I'm just going to measure my sugar into a bowl. So that way I can add it really easily, because what I'm going to do is start boiling my berries and then I'm going to want to stir in the sugar. So if I have it pre-measured, it's going to make it easy for me to just dump it in. Alright, so I have 7 cups, which I know that is a lot of sugar, so if that's too much for you, you can look into the low sugar recipe, but this is going to help my jam set up and be thick. So I'm just going to keep this by the stove here, and I'm going to start cooking my berries. And I want to bring them to a boil. So I'm going to turn them on high heat and I'm going to stir them as I cook them. Okay, so I want to bring my jam to a full rolling boil. And that means when I'm stirring it, which I want to continuously stir it so it won't stick to the bottom of my pan. See how when I stir it, it keeps boiling. So once it gets to that point, and I'm stirring it constantly and bubbles won't go away, I'm gonna add my sugar, and you're gonna want to be really careful while you do this because it could pop at you, so maybe have an older person help you with this part. And I'm just gonna stir in my sugar. I don't want to dump the whole 7 cups in at a time, but I want to do it pretty quickly. I'm just pouring in enough that I can mix it evenly in, and then add a little bit more. And this is actually a good multiple person job here. And after I've added my sugar, I want to keep stirring it and bring it back to a full rolling boil. And once it hits that point, I'm gonna time it for 1 minute of boiling. That can't be stirred down. And it should happen pretty quick. The sugar just cools it down a little bit, so it takes a couple minutes to return to that boil, but it won't take too long. So keep stirring it. So you especially don't want your sugar to burn onto the bottom of your pot, because that will give you a big cleanup job at the end. So I'm just kind of scraping my spoon around all parts of the bottom to make sure nothing's sticking. And I can see my water bath canner is gonna be ready for me, so that's good. I won't have to wait for that. Okay, so this has reached a boil and it's still bubbling as I stir it. So I'm gonna start my timer for 1 minute. And I'm gonna stir it really fast so it won't stick to the bottom or bubble over. If it bubbles over, then you'll really have a big cleanup to do. I might even need to turn it down a tiny bit. And some people say, actually, like all the old recipes say that you can add a little bit of butter to reduce your amount of foam, but I don't do that anymore because so many people don't eat dairy. I want to be able to share my jam with whoever wants to eat it. So the foam is not bad, it just doesn't look as nice in the jars. Oh. Alright, now I'm going to turn this off. And I'm going to keep stirring it so I make sure it doesn't stick. And I might move it off the heat a little bit. You can still tell it's very, very hot. And you can just skim off some of the foam. You're supposed to use a metal spoon, but I do not have one that's big enough. So I'm just going to do the best I can. And you want to try to skim it off pretty quickly. And the foam is actually just part of the jam, so it still tastes really good. I usually just keep it and eat it right away. You can just eat it on some crackers or toast or a sandwich. Like I said, it just doesn't look as nice in the jars, but it's just your berries and sugar, so there's nothing wrong with it. And then I'm going to use my funnel and a ladle to transfer my jam into my clean jars. And I have all my jars on a towel here. So in case I spill anything, it'll hopefully catch it on the towel. And I like to just put my funnel right next to the edge of the pan. So hopefully I won't spill very much. And I'm gonna fill my jars most of the way. I just want to leave about a 1/4 inch of headspace at the top. And I'm just gonna continue filling all my jars until I'm out of jam. And this is really hot, so I'm holding my jar really close to the top. If you want to be safe, you could just leave them on the counter, and if you spill a little bit, it's probably better than getting burned by the hot jam. Okay, so now I'm going to take either my canning tool, or I could use a knife or a small spatula if I don't own one of these. If you don't own one of these and you want to do some canning, I'd recommend getting one of these because they're very handy. You can probably get them at Albertsons or Fred Meyer, or of course you can order them online. It usually comes with this, a funnel, and a magnet for lifting up your metal lids, and maybe even a jar lifter. So I just want to go around the edges and make sure there's no air bubbles trapped in there, so I get a really nice seal and a good looking jar without bubbles in it. And then I'm just going to use this measuring tool to measure a 1/4 inch of space. So I'm going to put this part on the edge of my jar, and I want this to touch my jam. And if I don't have quite enough, I can add a little bit more. This is what's called adjusting the headspace. So I make sure I have just enough space for my jar to seal properly in the boiling water canner. So I always like to do this when I have a little bit of jam left, because usually I'll need to add a little bit more. Sometimes when you go around the edges, it makes the jam settle in the jar a little bit more. Or if you have too much, of course, you can take some out with a spoon. And then if I have a little bit left in my pot, which I do, I could either get more jars or just eat this or keep it in the fridge if I don't want to seal it. Then I'm going to take a wet paper towel and I'm just going to wipe the top rim of my jars, so I make sure there's no bits of food stuck to there, so that way my lids can create a nice seal. If I have food on this part or anything, it'll create a barrier so my lid won't stick very well. And then if I'm canning, I need to make sure to use a fresh lid every time to make a good seal. So I'm just going to place that on. Then I'm going to put my band on, and I want to just tighten it about a 1/4 of a turn with my fingers. So after it starts getting tight, I'm just going to tighten it a little bit more. I don't want to over tighten it, but I don't want it to be too loose. I want it to be just right. And I'm just going to show you an example of when the center pops out. it's not sealed. That's going to be important later, but hopefully all my jars will seal. Okay, then I'm going to very carefully put my jars into my boiling water bath canner. So I want to use my jar lifter to lift my jars. I'm going to make sure I have a nice grip on them. And I'm just going to put them on my rack. And I want to really carefully place them in. And what I like to do is put one on, then kind of put one across from it to balance it out evenly. If I put them all on one side, they might kind of fall in. And I just want to leave a little bit of space in between each jar so the water can get in between them. And you definitely want to use a rack for this. If you don't have one of these, they're not very expensive. You could put something on the bottom of your pot, like, I don't know, maybe a steamer or something. You just don't want your jars directly touching the bottom because they might break. Then once my jars are in, I'm just going to use pot holders to lower them into the water. And I want to make sure my water level is at least 1 inch above the top of my jars, which it is. And then when the water starts boiling again, it's pretty much there, but I don't want to start my timer until it's boiling. And I want to time them for 10 minutes after the water starts boiling. Some recipes will tell you you can boil them for 5 minutes, but Safe Canning actually says nothing should be boiled for less than 10 minutes. So if you find a jam recipe that tells you to seal it for 5 minutes, just seal it for 10 just to be safe, because you want to make sure your food is safely preserved. So as soon as this returns to a boil, I'm going to time it for 10 minutes and then I'll come check them when my timer goes off. Okay, so it's been 10 minutes, so I can turn this off, and I'm going to carefully take my jars out. So I can just really carefully use my pot holders to lift the rack back up so I don't have to reach into the boiling water. And I'll get my jars out and carefully put them back onto the towel with my jar lifter. You can also put them on a metal cooling rack. And we're jamming. So I'm just gonna take these out, and I want to let them sit undisturbed for 24 hours so my lids can make a nice seal. And hopefully we'll start to hear these pop down so we'll know they're sealing. But even if they seal right away, I still want to just leave them undisturbed so they can get a really good suction and seal really well. And then I can store them on my shelf until I'm ready to use them. Alright, thanks for watching my video, and happy jamming!